under the scorching Mexican sun, nestled deep in the Sierra Madre Mountains. An aging veteran named Daniel Grizzly Carter ran a modest farm. His days spent tending to his animals, his nights spent beneath the vast, open sky with nothing but the quiet hum of cicadas and the occasional howl of a distant coyote for company. To outsiders, he was just another retired old man, a relic of a forgotten war, tending to his pigs, horses, and a particularly intelligent murder of crows. But what no one knew, what no one suspected, was that each of his animals had been trained to kill, remnants of a classified military program that had long since been buried under bureaucratic red tape, and when the cartel rolled into his town, using it as a transit hub for their drug shipments, they saw only a feeble old man and his ridiculous farm of freaks, laughing at the way his pigs seemed to follow him with eerie discipline, mocking the way his crows circled overhead like trained scouts, and ridiculing the unnatural stillness of his German shepherds, who sat in rigid formation, their amber eyes locked onto the interlopers with an unsettling intelligence. The cartel's leader, a man known as El Phantasma, had no patience for foolishness, and though he was barely present in the town, his lieutenants ran rampant, stealing from locals, extorting businesses, and asserting dominance over every aspect of life. And when they set their sights on Daniel's farm, they treated it as nothing more than a playground for their cruelty. At first it was small things. Graffiti scrawled across his barn, a severed rooster's head left on his porch, loud laughter from passing trucks as cartel thugs hurled empty beer bottles at his livestock. But then, emboldened by their lack of consequences, they escalated, slashing his fences, scaring his horses into bolting, even going so far as to steal one of his pigs, a massive brute named Sarge, tying him to the back of their pickup and dragging him down the dusty road for sport, laughing as the animal squealed in pain, its thick hide scraping against the jagged rocks of the road, and as Daniel watched, his hands tightening into fists, his blood turning to molten steel in his veins, the past roared back to him. Memories of war, of jungle ambushes, of death in the shadows, of the relentless, unbreakable will of a soldier trained not to yield, and that night, as he tended to Sarge's wounds, whispering to the pig in a voice hardened by years of discipline, he made a decision, one that he had not made since the day he left the battlefield. This would not go unanswered. They had made a grave mistake. They had mocked something they did not understand, and before the week was over, they would learn what it meant to awaken a warrior whose battlefield was not yet done with him, and whose army, though unseen, lurked in the shadows, waiting for his command. The cartel underestimated him. They all did. For years, Daniel had lived in relative peace, his farm a quiet refuge from the ghosts of war. But now, war had come knocking, and he would answer in kind. The night after Sarge's brutal ordeal, Daniel sat in his dimly lit barn, his fingers running over the scarred wooden table where his battle plans lay spread out. Years of combat had ingrained a simple truth in him. Never react with anger. Always respond with strategy. He wouldn't just fight back. He would annihilate them, setting the trap. Daniel spent the next few days preparing the battlefield. His land was vast, stretching out into rugged terrain filled with rocky outcrops, old dried riverbeds, and thick patches of desert brush. Perfect for ambush tactics. First, he reinforced his perimeter, securing tripwires, pressure traps, and makeshift snares in key locations where the cartel thugs would likely approach from. Then he turned to his animals. His dogs, Ghost, Fong, and Havoc, were the first line of defense. Each had been trained in military K-9 techniques, capable of silent takedowns, disarming opponents, and even retrieving weapons. His pigs, Sarge and his herd, were far deadlier than anyone could imagine. People underestimated pigs. They assumed they were slow, stupid, and harmless. But Sarge and his kind were trained in crowd disruption tactics, charging enemies in unison, creating chaos, even flipping vehicles if necessary. Their sheer mass and speed alone made them lethal. Then there were the crows, the dark sentinels of the farm. Years of conditioning had turned them into more than just birds. They were his eyes in the sky, his air support. They could scout ahead, signal movement, and, when needed, attack with precise strikes. With every hour, the farm transformed. It was no longer just a homestead. It was a battlefield. The cartel's retaliation. The cartel thugs weren't patient men. The night after their prank with Sarge, they expected the old man to either retaliate recklessly or cower in fear. When neither happened, they grew bolder. On the third night, just past midnight, they returned. 6 of them, rolling up in 2 dust-covered trucks, their headlights off, their boots crunching against the gravel as they moved through the property like prowling wolves. They thought they were the hunters. They were wrong. Daniel, watching from a shadowed perch in the barn's loft, whispered a single command. Now, the first strike came from above. His crows swooped down from their perches, their dark wings a blur against the starlit sky. They weren't just there for intimidation. These birds had been trained to target eyes, ears, and hands. They dived with lethal precision, their razor-sharp talons and beaks tearing at exposed flesh. The cartel men shouted in panic, swatting wildly as crows screeched around them, blinding them, forcing them to fire their weapons blindly into the air. That was when Ghost and Fong struck. 2 of the cartel thugs, still reeling from the crow assault, never saw the dark shapes hurtling toward them. The dogs hit like missiles, their jaws locking onto arms and throats, dragging the men down into the dirt with feral force. Havoc, the third dog, moved like a shadow, circling behind one of the cartel soldiers, his powerful jaws snapping onto the man's gun-wielding hand. The crunch of bone breaking filled the air, followed by a scream. Chaos erupted. Pigs don't just eat, they hunt. Sarge led the charge, his massive bulk barreling into 2 cartel gunmen who were still trying to aim their weapons. One went flying back, crashing into the side of a truck, his spine twisting unnaturally. The other was knocked flat, his gun skittering across the ground. Before he could crawl away, 3 more pigs surrounded him, their tusks slicing into flesh, hooves trampling anything beneath them, blood mixed with dirt. Daniel moved like a ghost, staying in the shadows, watching, waiting for the right moment. When one of the cartel men finally gained some sense of control, lifting his rifle and tried to take a shot, Daniel fired first, a precise, controlled burst from his suppressed rifle. The man crumpled without a sound, his body joining the others on the blood-stained ground. The rest of the cartel? They ran, or tried to. The farm was now a maze of death. One of them sprinted for his truck, but his foot caught on a tripwire, sending him sprawling face first into a jagged pit of wooden spikes. Another, still clawing at his crow-pecked face, tried to climb a fence, only for Ghost to launch after him, dragging him down in a mess of gnashing teeth and bone-snapping violence. Within minutes, it was over. 6 men had entered. None survived. The message: Daniel didn't hide the bodies. He left them where they fell, their weapons piled in the center of his farm, a single black feather placed atop the heap, a warning to the others. By dawn, word had spread like wildfire. The local town, once afraid of the cartel, whispered in shock and awe about what had happened. The rumors varied. Some said the old man had summoned spirits to fight for him. Others claimed he was a supernatural force, impossible to kill. But the cartel? They knew the truth. They had underestimated the wrong man. And now, El Phantasma himself was coming. Dawn broke over the mountains, casting long shadows across Daniel's bloodstained land. The bodies of the fallen cartel thugs had been left where they dropped, a silent testament to the old veteran's warning. Their weapons, stacked neatly in a pile near his barn, were an invitation. Come and take them if you dare. Word traveled fast. The town whispered about the slaughter at the Carter farm, and while many had feared the cartel's wrath, something had shifted. For the first time in years, the people saw hope. But hope wasn't enough to stop what was coming. El Phantasma had received the message loud and clear, and he was furious. The arrival of El Phantasma. By midday, the cartel's response force was on its way. This was no small group of drunken thugs. This was an army. 5 heavily armored SUVs roared down the dirt road toward Daniel's farm, their tinted windows concealing at least a dozen of El Fantasma's best men, armed to the teeth with automatic rifles, body armor, and enough firepower to level the entire property. Inside the lead vehicle, El Fantasma himself sat in the passenger seat, his fingers tapping against his holstered pistol. He was a man of legend, a ghost who ruled with merciless efficiency, his name spoken in hushed tones even among rival cartels. As the convoy neared the farm, one of his lieutenants smirked. An old man and his animals did this. He scoffed, looking at the carnage left behind. El Fantasma didn't smile. His cold, black eyes remained fixed on the farm ahead. "He's not an old man," he murmured. "He's a soldier, and we're about to step onto his battlefield. The siege begins." The convoy stopped just outside the farm's perimeter, the men stepping out, weapons drawn. Silence. No gunfire. No movement. Just the sound of the wind cutting through the dry air. El Fantasma raised a hand. "Move in." The cartel soldiers advanced in a tight formation, their boots crunching against the gravel as they approached the main barn. Still no movement. They didn't realize they had already entered the kill zone. Daniel watched from a concealed elevated sniper perch in the barn loft, his rifle scope trained on the cartel soldiers below. He counted 15, all highly trained, all dangerous. It didn't matter. The animals were already in position. At his signal, chaos erupted. A flurry of black wings descended from the sky. Crows. Hundreds of them. They dove straight into the convoy, slamming against windshields, pecking at eyes, tearing at exposed skin. The cartel soldiers panicked, raising their rifles and firing blindly into the air. Then came the dogs. Ghost Fong and Havoc burst from the shadows, moving like phantoms through the dust, their training flawless. One cartel soldier turned just in time to see Ghost leap, jaws snapping onto his throat, dragging him into the dirt with a sickening crunch. Fong lunged for a gunman's wrist, his powerful bite crushing bone, the rifle clattering to the ground. The man screamed, only for Havoc to end it with a precise strike to the jugular. The pigs came next. Sarge, his wounds still fresh, led the charge. A 500-pound wall of fury. He crashed into the closest SUV, his sheer force flipping it onto its side, the cartel soldiers inside trapped and screaming. Other pigs followed suit, their tusks ripping through tendons, arteries, legs, whatever they could reach. The cartel formation collapsed. El Fantasma, calm despite the bloodbath around him, raised his pistol and fired, the bullet striking Ghost in the side. The dog yelped, collapsing onto the dirt. Daniel's blood ran cold. He squeezed the trigger. One shot. Direct hit. The cartel gunman standing beside El Fantasma dropped, a clean bullet hole through his forehead. The cartel leader didn't even flinch. He turned his cold gaze toward the barn loft, spotting Daniel through the dust and chaos. A silent challenge. This was personal now. The one-on-one duel. The remaining cartel soldiers were either dead or fleeing, leaving El Fantasma and Daniel alone. The leader walked toward the barn, his pistol raised. "You're a stubborn old bastard, gringo." Daniel emerged, his own rifle slung over his shoulder. "You came into my home. You killed my men." "They weren't men," Daniel growled. "They were cowards." El Fantasma smirked. "I see now. You weren't just some old soldier. You were something more than you'll ever be." The cartel boss didn't hesitate. He raised his pistol and fired. Daniel was already moving. The bullet grazed his shoulder, but he barely flinched. His instincts took over. He dove behind a wooden cart, returning fire. El Fantasma was fast, weaving between cover, his movements fluid. He was a seasoned killer, and he had never lost a one-on-one fight. But Daniel wasn't a cartel thug. He was a special operations combat veteran. He counted his opponent's shots. 1, 2, 3. By the fifth shot, Daniel knew his enemy was almost empty. He broke cover. Fast. Precise. A knife flashed in his hand. El Phantasma raised his pistol for a final shot. Click. Empty. Daniel was on him in a second. A single, clean slash across the throat. El Phantasma's eyes widened. His pistol clattered to the ground. He fell to his knees, clutching his throat, blood pouring between his fingers. Daniel knelt beside him. This was your mistake. The cartel boss gurgled something unintelligible before he finally collapsed, his lifeless body hitting the dirt. It was over. The aftermath. The town never saw the cartel again. The survivors spread the story far and wide. An old American war veteran who turned his farm into a death trap, using his animals as an elite strike force to wipe out El Phantasma's entire personal army. Some believed the story. Others dismissed it as legend. Daniel never cared. He returned to his quiet life, tending to his animals, patching up ghost wounds, watching his crows circle above. But he knew one thing for certain. No one would ever dare step foot on his land again, because now the world knew the truth. His farm wasn't just a farm. It was a fortress. And he was the guardian of the damned.